All right, everyone. I'm going to try to get through this lecture pretty quickly. I have a doctor telehealth appointment, and it might start early. It's about 2:15 on Monday afternoon, and I wanted to finish. They were supposed to, the appointment was supposed to start at 3, but then I just got a call that it might start early, so I might have to stop. I'd rather just finish this so I don't lose my train of thought. I still not quite sure what we're doing on Thursday. I think I have a film on the syllabus. I may or may not have you watch a film. I remember trying to find films that I thought would work for this class, and it was a struggle, or films that might give you a sense of what a book like Privilege is about. So keep your eyes peeled. If I don't have you watch a film, I'll just pretty much run through the discussion board, maybe share some ideas with you. I'm deciding right now in the fall whether I want to teach online or not. I obviously think working in classes, it's what I'm best at, but I'm a little bit at higher risk for complications than the regular person, so I'm not sure if it's going to be worth it to me to deal with that risk in the fall. But I like to teach. I want students to enroll in my class. I want them to learn. I think if I have students who know it's going to be an in-person class from the beginning, I can expect to have more synchronous activities, actual people getting together at the same time and talking. We had a wonderful session last week. No matter how much I've enjoyed talking to Toby, we had 2 or 3 new people join the group, and they were really good. Anna was great. She had a lot to say, and I'm wondering, well, Anna, why didn't you chime in earlier? Ana Lucia, I believe the name is. Couldn't see her face, but had a lot of great things to say as well. And there was maybe somebody else on there too. I don't remember really well. So I think if we had something like that, it would do a better job of replicating in person. Although I, like many of you, like to be in the same room. There's just the energy, the gestures. It's just easier. But nobody at UTSA knows what we're going to be doing in the fall exactly, what the administration is going to say. So I really will want feedback about how to do a good online class. And I'd like you to separate, of course, ideas about what I've been able to do, what I've not been able to do, from the larger issue of I don't expect anybody to have an awesome learning experience over the past month or so because life has sucked. It's been really hard. So if this weren't happening, if we weren't suffering through this pandemic and all that goes along with it, the anxiety, the being stuck at home, the connectivity problems, you may have actually enjoyed the online portion a little bit more. Maybe not. So try to keep that out, to balance, to remember that if I ask you for feedback on Thursday, and I probably will. So I did not go back and look at the discussion board. I was actually living in terror because the first response, I forgot who wrote it, but it was, the scenario was asking you to think of yourself working on a Democratic presidential campaign and to try to use the cultural material presented in this book to convince a person not to vote for Donald Trump. And the first person, I totally respected it. I actually kind of agree with it. They said, it's not really my job, my belief to go in and try to change people's minds about stuff like this. And I thought all of a sudden that post, instead of truly being a hypothetical, you saw I wrote a long response, it could be taken out of context. And I'm this weird liberal lefty professor who's trying to, proselytize students and tell them to vote Democratic, that Donald Trump is awful. And whatever my personal politics are, I think the folks of you who are conservative, and I know you know how much I respect your viewpoints, I do not see the classroom as a place for me to be teaching you what's politically right. It's about teaching what I think is empirically right, what people are actually like, and building mutual understanding. It's why I teach a book like this, Strangers in Their Own Land, because I feel like it's a pretty sympathetic portrait that liberals have these stereotypical views of conservatives that aren't quite right. Because we don't get a chance to interact. We don't see over these empathy walls that Hochschild talks about. So the last thing I want is for anybody to feel like I'm trying to turn you into a Democratic activist or something. If you read these books and that's what you come to, that's fine. If your conservative perspectives become stronger, that's fine too. The classroom and me as a professor, it's not my job. I disagree with a lot of professors. I think it's their job to do social justice. teach how to, what politics you should have in the classroom. I don't think so. I'm not here to change your values. I'm here to help you to understand people. And of course, I believe, I'm kind of an optimistic. I was talking to Toby about that if you really do understand how complicated people are and build a lot of empathy for them, that we can produce a lot of positive change in our city, in our country, and in our world, and work towards a better understanding of justice. But I'm not here to teach, blatant politics. So I was a little bit afraid of what you would think of that scenario. Plus, I was going to go back and read right now, but I wanted to do this lecture before the doctor called. What else is there? The last lecture I did, the video one, I sound like only a few people watched that. So hopefully a few of you will watch this. It's going to be quick. I'm not going to talk about the Appendix C, but I just looked over my notes. I urge you to read it. It includes a lot of what I consider to be accurate information. Hochschild is a brilliant person. She's very good with the data about how many people actually work for the federal government. Where do taxes come from? Who gets welfare? It really is not. This is where she comes up with the facts. A lot of people, what they think government is doing for certain people, the facts are very different. Just the idea that I've said repeatedly, the majority of people on welfare in this country are white. I remember one fact. There's this idea that African American women have a lot more kids than white women, and I think Hochschild in that appendix says, like the average African American woman has 1.85 or 8.83 kids, and the average white, Euro-American woman has 1.77. It's basically the same. So we have these weird ideas that we get from media, and they're not accurate. So read the appendix. I'm not going to list out the facts for you. They're not in this PowerPoint, but it's good stuff to know, no matter what your politics are. So chapter 16, what did I entitle this chapter? This lecture, Easing Political Polarization. I think that's a good thing no matter what. And I just wrote this discussion board prompt because I was about to start the lecture. I'm like, I haven't had a discussion board prompt yet. So I'll put this up and you'll be able to start working on it at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Came up with 3 questions for you. Probably not worded that well because I did it very quickly. I apologize for that. So in your discussion board responses, answer one or more of the following 3 questions. Number 1, do you think that if more liberally minded people were to read Strangers in Their Own Land, it would be easier for them to talk to conservative people and potentially to find mutual respect and common ground with them? Why or why not? If this book were read by a lot more people, would liberals get past some of the stereotypes, have more respect, or at least more understanding that would allow a conversation to occur in more effective ways? Do you think this book could do that if more people read it? I'm curious. Number 2, if you don't think this book would help more liberals to interact with conservatives in productive or empathetic ways, how could it be changed? How could the book be changed to better accomplish that objective? Maybe you don't think a book could do it at all. Maybe you think it has to be film, documentary, TV. I don't know, but what could this book do to really make liberals feel a little bit more like they're willing to go beyond their stereotypes and understand and try to build common ground with conservative people, to not just say, we're two sides, we'll never agree. Remember that initial fact we talked about? It used to be in this country that parents were really scared or opposed to the idea of their kids marrying somebody of another race. And now that's largely gone away, thank God. But parents are much more opposed to their children marrying somebody who belongs to a different political party than the parents do. That's polarization. That's a really extreme inside state of affairs. And number 3, do you think a book like Strangers in Their Own Land could be written about a liberal community, and that it could open conservative people's eyes about who liberals are in a more accurate way to understand them and thus to interact and even find common ground with them? Why or why not? So I assigned this book because, I know most college students, especially in South Texas, San Antonio, are relatively liberal and progressive. And I wanted, to stretch your minds a little bit and have a good portrait of a conservative community and what it's like to live there. It's obviously a very specific one because these people are in very bad shape. They're not wealthy and they're dying because of environmental contamination. That was the real link to life and oil. We use petrochemicals, plastics, gasoline Kofan people aren't paying for it. They're not the only ones who are paying for it. People in South Louisiana are paying for it with their lives too. Um, and obviously, the book Privilege, it's not exactly like the one I was going to have you read. It's not exactly like Strangers in Their Own Land, but could you imagine a book being written about like some stereotypically extremely liberal community? I don't know, Berkeley, California, Austin, Texas. And could it be written in a way that actually conservatives would be like, oh, maybe I don't quite understand these people. Maybe I should listen a little bit more. Maybe I respect or at least empathize with these people in a way I didn't assume that I would. Could that book be written? I'm curious what you would think, because ultimately that's the book I would like to teach alongside a book like this at the end. Privilege is a good job, but it's mainly about elite a boarding school that produces very cosmopolitan people, which is that opposite of that kind of rooted, grounded self that like Janice Areno really values. And those people tend to vote very Democratic, although they also tend to rule corporations in the world. There's this idea that the rich are inherently Republican. Wall Street supports Democrats. Silicon Valley supports Democrats. The Democratic Party is not the party necessarily any longer of the working class. That's not the case anymore. So some of the wealthiest people in the world are very liberal in many ways. So the book Privilege is about, producing people who tend to be extremely liberal, but also tend to be, quite powerful at the same time. So we'll see what happens with the discussion board prompt. Just a few slides here. In this last chapter, Hochschild writes 2 letters to the left and the right, one to each, trying to get them to think a little bit better about this polarization. Page 233-34, she says, to liberals to the left, this is her letter to them, the Tea Party members of South Louisiana, quote, will teach you volumes about strong community, grit, and resilience. Good qualities that anybody has, right? Endurance, that's something y'all said liberals value too. Liberals supposed to value strong community, resilience, grit, and maybe people thought that they wouldn't understand that, conservatives, but Hochschild saying these people will tell you that that's very true about them, and those are things to be admired. Page 234. You may assume that powerful right-wing organizers pursuing their financial interests hook right-wing grassroots adherents by appealing to the bad angels of their nature, their greed, selfishness, racial intolerance, homophobia, and desire to get out of paying taxes that go to the unfortunate. As I saw at the Trump rally in New Orleans, some of that appeal goes on. But that appeal obscures another, to the right wing's good angels, their patience in waiting in line in scary economic times, their capacity for loyalty, for sacrifice, for endurance, qualities of the deep story self. Now, those stereotypes about conservatives, some of which may be very true, that's the thing that the leftist media is already saying about them. But there are these good angels to conservatives, of conservatives, their deep story selves that Hochschild wants the left to know about, because she wants us to empathize with them, to admire them, and have a conversation with them so we can get things done in this country, right? Rather than split off. It's not only Texas that's talking about seceding from the country, or the South, which actually tried to at one point. There's talk about California seceding from this country. I don't want California to secede from the country. I don't want Texas to secede from the country. We got to stay together, work together, and get things done and make life better for everybody. Now, what about Hochschild's letter to the right? So she's writing to conservative people. And this isn't much of the material that was in the book. This is something new. Progressive liberals also aren't happy with the country. There's this idea, maybe perhaps from some on the right, that liberals are in control or were in control with Obama and Clinton, and America's exactly how they wanted it to be. No, liberals are really upset with politics, with parties, with the state of the country too. And many liberals also feel that they're stuck waiting in line, although maybe the line that they see themselves waiting in is a bit different, maybe created by class, by economic inequality, by political corruption, that they can't progress, that they too are being pushed back, but maybe the ones holding them back, liberals think about it differently. But the idea that maybe we have a same kind of metaphor can help us to talk to each other, right, and respect each other's positions. Also, to the right, she says many of your goals are the same as the liberals' goals. Quote, vital community life, full employment, the dignity of labor, and freedom. What liberals don't value community life? What liberals don't want everybody to have a job? What liberals don't believe that there's honor in work, especially fulfilling, well-paying work? Which liberals don't value freedom, right? Maybe we understand freedom in a slightly different way, but there's a lot of overlap there too. But she's saying to those on the right, the policies that y'all favor aren't guaranteed. The liberals don't feel like they're guaranteed to help us reach those goals: full employment, freedom, dignity, and all of that stuff. So the policies might be different, but maybe the end point is some overlap. She gives some facts here. Historically, Democratic administrations in 20th century American history have brought higher incomes and more jobs than Republican administrations. It's a good thing to know when you think about what a Democratic presidential candidate might do. Maybe they do a good job getting jobs and income for people and getting the free market to work well. Also, as I said before, many of the states with the strictest environmental regulations are doing the best economically. This whole idea, pollution is the sacrifice we must make for capitalism. It's the environment or jobs. Hochschild is saying, if you look at, states with strong environmental laws they're doing well economically, maybe better with states than states without any or very weak environmental restrictions. So that's a fact. This is her letter to the right. She wants them to know this. She also wants them to know progressive liberals believe that corporate marauders are destroying the public goods we all appreciate and depend on: our education system, our parks, our infrastructure, which use tax dollars to create richer lives and more economic opportunity for everyone. That's kind of her main metaphor at the end. We have this common public square, these things we all depend upon that we value, that bring us together. Our schools, right? Our police, our military, our firefighters, all sorts of things that are public, that belong to all of us. The air we breathe, the rain that falls from the sky. And liberals see private interests and corruption coming and ripping away those things that we should all have access to, raiding it, destroying it. And they're worried about that, the public goods and the things we should universally have access to being taken away. That's the kind of thing that upsets them, rather than the vision of waiting in line that many of those on the right have. And I think she also says she wants folks on the right to realize that progressive liberals do see themselves as proud Americans. They are patriots in their minds. But for them, America has always been about accepting outsiders in and turning them into valued insiders. Doesn't mean for liberals, that they have to give up their culture, but we are a nation of immigrants. Immigration, cultural diversity has made America a beautiful, fascinating, friendly place to live in. And liberals are very proud of that. They're patriotic about it. They want it to keep happening. They want America to be that city on the hill that folks come to so they can have freedom, so they can make a decent living. And so, we can all live slightly differently, but understand. All right, there's the doctor. Alas, I'll have to put this on hold. All right, folks, I am back. I don't think I recorded that. We'll see. Yeah, I had an incident the other day. You know me, I like to talk about my problems, especially my psychological. I like to talk about my physical problems too. You read all about them in the book, but I've really taken to running out here in the hill country at the ranch, and I love to push myself. I was naturally better at running than I thought I was. I could go further, and when it was 90 degrees, I decided to do a 5-mile run in a very isolated area up a hill, and was pushing, and then just had a massive panic attack that I was having a heart attack, that I was going to die. Couldn't walk, couldn't run, couldn't stand still. And it was just one of those, for those people who have panic disorder like me, it was just brutal, and has left me kind of shaken for the time being. But of course, after that, came home, took some medication, and that made me feel better. Go to see your psychiatrist or therapist. So I was just talking to the doctor about, I do have some underlying heart issues, not serious, but whether, how far you can push yourself and whether to worry about this. And he basically said, don't worry about it. Just don't push yourself too fast, too far. So anyways, that made me feel a little bit better. Tomorrow, actually, go the mental route with it and talk to my therapist. So hopefully I'll beat it. But it's a rough time for all of us. Anyways, so I was talking about Hochschild's letter to the right. Let me get this back up. So yes, I basically finished this slide about, the patriotism of progressive people and that it's earnest and genuine, but based on a different model of America being a joining place for the whole world, and we want others to come and to experience it and to be part of it, without giving up who they are, and just, trusting them and wanting them and thinking they're good people. So anyways, maybe folks on the right understand that we're all equally patriots, even though we're both very critical of much of what the government's doing and how America is currently structured and even America's history. There's nothing, critique of the government is a very American trait. But we can also love a lot about our country and fight for it. And there's this idea that the left hates America, that leftist politicians are always apologizing, and that's not a patriotic thing to do. But Hochschild wants, conservative folks to understand the patriotism of leftist folks too. So final slide. One more quote, page 233. In my travels, I was humbled by the complexity and height of the empathy wall. But with their teasing, good-hearted acceptance of a stranger from Berkeley, the people I met in Louisiana showed me that, in human terms, the wall can easily come down. And issue by issue, there's possibility for practical cooperation. Left and right in Congress now agree on the goal of reducing the prison population. Young conservatives are far more likely than their elders to care about the environment. The last time I saw Mike Schaff, he surprised me with another crossover issue. Quote, "Big money escalates our differences. Let's get it out of politics, both sides." Hochschild talked about this in that one video clip I recommended that you watch with her. On the right, environmental issues are becoming increasingly acceptable, especially to young conservatives, young Republicans. Many people on the left and right think there are too many people in prison. Of course, it's a huge cost and reason for taxation, government expenditure, drug laws. There are people on the right who've, including, I think Trump said this, and I think, who was it? Rand Paul as well, that the way drug laws are structured and the effect it has on minority populations in this country is totally unfair. So they want criminal justice reform. Right and left have cooperated on issues like combating sex trafficking. George W. Bush, I think, was pretty good on tackling HIV in Africa. And here, although there are, this is a tough one for some conservatives because they believe, on principle that how you spend your money is like free speech. So if you want to spend your money supporting a political candidate, that's free speech and you can't give up on it. It's in the Constitution. But as we hear in this book, and I think it's true for a lot of people, a lot of folks on the right don't want people buying elections. We want money out of politics. I don't know if the right would want them to be publicly funded, which a lot of left-wing people do, but we both realize that money corrupts, and it's best to keep it out of there. So anyways, there are things we agree on. There's ways to work across the aisle. You might find people who will be your collaborator and your ally on all sorts of issues, but only if you empathize, try to understand before judging. Understand, of course, sometimes you understand you're going to have disagreements that are not going to go away. You don't try to say everybody's the same, because they're not. All these serious forms of prejudice exist, elitism on both sides. That's impossible. Religious differences, moral differences. But it is possible to talk, to scale the empathy wall. It's possible to find things we can work on in common. So, kind of a hopeful note that Hochschild ends this book with. I'm not sure what she would change 2020 after 4 years of Donald Trump being president, whether she thought that. Actually, I remember Trump, even when he was campaigning, positioned himself as massively in favor of gay rights. It's kind of part of the anti-Islamic thing. But I remember him being at a campaign rally, like waving a rainbow flag around. That's an interesting one. The reaction to Islamic fundamentalism and how that brings left and right together in really interesting and perhaps troubling ways. So I'm not sure what she should say now. What she would say now. I'm curious too, as I've been mentioning before about COVID-19. People, we're seeing it fracture now, but trying to come together and seeing the federal government as something that has a real role here to play in keeping society functioning, supporting people who are out of jobs. I think there's a chance for this not to tear us apart, but to bring us together. And we do that by listening to each other and learning and not working via stereotypes. So I'll leave you with that thought, and we'll do something for Thursday. I'm not sure what it is. Now I got to go edit this video because it is clearly broken into pieces. So hope all's well. Hope you're doing well, and we will talk soon. All right.